So today, as you all know, more than ever, research data management is essential for many reasons. So the research results that you're achieving must be, of course, comprehensible and reusable. For that, you need the data to prove what experiments you did and what conclusions you have drawn from it. Funding agencies today and publishers require most often a proper research data management plan, and the data in the end must be published together with the publication that you're writing. And especially research data management and the proper curation and explanation of data, description of data is essential when we are working in areas where we only have a few data sets. Not only when we need a lot of data, but also when we need few data sets that are difficult to collect. It must be enabled that we share data with other researchers, and especially in these areas, we need proper data which is understandable, reusable, and can be exchanged between researchers. But as you all know, also research data often does not correspond to this ideal, and it's often hard to get to a good research data management for various reasons, which we will discuss in a minute. So when we look at data sharing in research, as I said, there are a lot of problems which hinder the sharing of data, and it hinders also the outcome of the research which we have. So for example, in biomedical research, not only in biomedical research, we face problems of data silos. So many people have isolated data described often also in non-standardized ways or in different ways, and it's hard to exchange that data and drive innovation in these fields. Of course, research data management is essential for utilizing intelligent methods like methods in AI. Here we also need more and more data to train the models that we want to use. And also we need proper described data and proper curated data, because now here is an example for a concept in healthcare. So what we expect from AI tools, how they should be, is that we need also the tools to be traceable, to be explainable, to be usable, and the foundation for all of these aspects is also that we have proper data as the foundation, proper knowledge as the foundation that we can utilize to provide explainable, trustable results from these AI methods. So that's not only a one direction that we want to investigate today, of course, in my talk, how AI can support the research data management. But on the other hand, we also have this mutual relationship that research data management is needed to support AI. So if we look, for example, at biomedical research, and we have the problem of not enough data, that we need to share data. Usually we have such a setting, and we will see the setting later on again. We have a researcher, let me get the laser pointer. We have a researcher here who has a specific research question, and the person is then executing corresponding studies which back up her research question or help to answer her research question. Let's say this is happening in a hospital. Alone in the hospital, you already have different data sources from different departments that you might need to use. You have different vocabularies already in the different departments. For example, radiology, laboratories, you have different vocabularies which you might use for describing the data. Then you want to exchange the data with others so that you have enough data for your research question, and have another person from another hospital where you have also other data sources, maybe using other vocabularies and so on. You get the idea. And then also other sources like biobanks, registries, cancer registries, for example, they have data you want to utilize. And again, you have multiple data resources and vocabularies denoted here with O and ontologies, which describe the data. Okay, the problems which we face here, as already said, is we often have data silos. The data is not interoperable between the different parties. We have heterogeneous, also multimodal data, which we need to handle differently. We have often also a problem of data sensitivity, data sovereignty. We have heterogeneous knowledge, which needs to be aligned if we bring together data from different parties, and we have a variety of stakeholders which have also different cultures in working with the data. So this is just looking at one domain. The problems aggravate also if we talk about interdisciplinary projects, right? Data quality, sorry. Of course, the most important and not most important, but one important thing is data quality, which we also need to consider when exchanging the data, which is also of course, of high importance when we look at data for AI methods. But we will come to that a little bit later also. So in interdisciplinary projects, we also face aggravation of these problems. So, for example, we were working in a project called Internet of Production. This is an excellence cluster here at the University of Aachen, where we try to bring data from various disciplines and various stakeholders together to bring data or to provide data in near real time for different intelligence tasks in the production and the manufacturing domain. Here we have an interdisciplinary project which was covering more than 35 institutes and over 200 researchers from the diverse disciplines. And here we faced several problems, especially in research data management, especially about the cultures of exchanging data, of storing data, and so on. And these posed a lot of barriers and showed us a lot of barriers which are there in fair research data management, hindering in the long run then innovation. So what we faced here, and what is also backed up by several other publications and studies, is of course that people or what hinders fair research data management is that you still have a high time, need a high amount of time and a high amount of effort to do proper research data management, to describe the data, to curate the data, and so on. As I said, the heterogeneity in data cultures, so it's not easy to exchange between disciplines easily. Also, what is a barrier in research data management is that we have missing and too low rewards for doing a proper research data management. Today, more and more that you can also publish the data sets and get citations for the data sets, but still the rewards are really low for that. Then also data literacy is a problem which we faced, so that in data management best practices are not known, and that we also have a lot of proprietary data types, data forms, formats, and tools, and also the complexity which comes with proper research data management. So, for example, dealing with vocabularies, to select vocabularies, to find where are vocabularies which fit, which one to pick. Do I use several of these? What are other colleagues using, and so on and so forth. So that was one very important point. And often also the loss of competitive advantages, that data is not shared because people fear that someone is taking the fruit of their work and doing even more fancier research on top of it. So for us, the most severe problems, or which were said by the researchers, what are the most pressing problems that they have to do research data management, is time and effort and the complexity. And hence, now that we're having new tools like generative AI, large language models, we thought about how can we support researchers in these tasks to speed up the work in research data management, and also to provide semantically rich data with lower effort. And hence, looking at large language models and generative AI, first of all, if we look at typical tasks, what we can do and how we can then we will see how we can utilize them for research data management. I guess you already know several of these, or used several of these large language model support. So for example, to complete and create text, of course, large language models are very famous for that. Summarizing texts, answering questions, translating texts are tasks which are supported easily by LLMs. And also the integration, we see also the integration of generative AI into different applications. So for example, if we look at office applications, you maybe know Copilot, integrated, for example, here in PowerPoint, where you can then describe what kind of pitch you would like to do for a certain product, maybe also provide some images for it, and you can then let PowerPoint and Copilot create you a first draft of a pitch. Also in teaching and learning, this is something we look at the university, of course, not only how students use LLMs in their daily study life, but also as the lecturers, how can we support students in their learning journey. So for example, summarize lectures, video lectures, create quizzes based on the lectures with LLM. So all of these support we are also trying out today in teaching at the university. Then programming can be also supported. So for example, so that many people use that today also here at the chair, for example, that you create documentation with Copilot while programming, that you create tests, automatic tests with it. All tedious works which come with programming can be supported or can be assisted using Copilot, for example. But there are also other classical AI topics where generative AI and LLMs come into play. So for example, in robot control, to not only interact with the user, but also on the fly create code for robot interaction. And finally, also science communication. This is also a nice example. I always like to present, so for example, to summarize and explain a paper. This is a paper we published last year. And we created just out of the box a podcast about it, which is, in our view, relatively good and natural. So I just give a short
Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're taking a closer look at knowledge graphs.
Knowledge graphs are like these really detailed maps of information, and they're changing how we work with data, actually.
Yeah, they are. It's really fascinating stuff. So to guide us through this deep dive, we've got a research paper titled From Genesis to Maturity, Managing Knowledge Graph Ecosystems Through Life Cycles.
Sounds pretty dense.
It is, but we're going to break it down. We're not just looking at knowledge graphs in isolation, though. We're going deep into the entire ecosystem they live in. Think of it like exploring a bustling city. We're not just looking at the buildings, but also the roads, the infrastructure, and all the communities that make it work.
Okay, so you get the idea, and this is something which we created out of the box and which was mostly correct. So not everything was correct, but it also surprised us because there were examples which were not in the paper. So it's a bit of a theoretic paper, vision paper. But there were also examples created for the podcast which were not in the paper. And that was really nice because, oh yeah, that's a good way to explain what is actually the essence of the paper. And that is really nice and shows already the power of generative AI. And this is already a little bit older. Maybe the quality today will be a little bit better. So after we have seen what are general tasks, let's first revisit also briefly some basics before we turn to what we can do in research data management with generative AI, or what we envision to do with it. Usually what we start from when we talk about using an LLM, using generative AI, is that we have some kind of model. The big models like GPT, for example, DeepSeek, and so on, which are so-called foundational models, which are usually multi-purpose. They are trained on very large amounts of data, different data, maybe images, maybe text, and so on. And parameters, weights are learned to present the model. And then we can imagine then how to find an answer using the model is then that we take inputs, text, for example, cut the text into chunks, and then place these chunks into a vector space which which we can see, which is built by the model, and we see then similar where we have similarities and close by in the space vectors. These are very likely answers or very likely information which are used to produce an answer. So the foundation models, as I said, usually are used as multi-purpose models. So you can make something like text completion, sentiment analysis, and something like that. However, you can also improve on that because you all know about hallucinations, so that, for example, answers could be created which are not true. So to improve outcomes, and we will see that a little bit later what to do about improving outcomes, there are different common methods. So for example, to use fine-tuning, so to train the model, to show the model more example of specialized tasks, show more specialized data to the model, and come up then with a fine-tuned model which can then solve specialized tasks, like, for example, analyzing the text of a medical report and coming up with an estimation of what could be the diagnosis from the report, just as a very simple example. So that is one method to get better outcomes and to target models to a specific task. Also, a technique to improve is retrieval augmented generation. So that means that we provide also additional facts and sources which are used to then back up the answers, you can say, which are given by the model, or which are given by the generative AI application. Okay, so how can we utilize now generative AI and these large language models for research data management? We looked first of all at the research data management cycle, as you can see it here in the middle. So these are the phases of the research data management cycle, and thought about what are potential tasks which can be supported. So something like searching for resources, but also data modeling, creating a model. So this is working very, very good that you have a requirements description, for example, and try to create a database, a relational database model format, for example. But also it can support in experiment design. We also did some tests here, data acquisition, or also data quality improvement. And what is more to, of course, research data management is to make research data management fair. So to look at the FAIR principle and see what kind of additional tasks do we have here, such as describing data with rich metadata, using fair vocabularies, or to look at where can we publish the data, what kind of metadata do we need for that to describe the data, and so on. And exactly here, and with the experience that we had in the interdisciplinary projects, we looked first of all especially at these points to see how can we support the researchers in our project in the tasks they feel the most burdening. We started off very simple. So this is an example from Internet of Production, where we have a use case in fine blanking. So this is a fine blanking machine. And we had researchers which they published a paper and also published a data set to the paper. The data set looked like this. So we had a certain folder structure. We had data with very meaningful column names, and the requirement here was now, okay, we have that kind of data, but we would like to create rich metadata to describe the data set additionally. So what we tried then is, first of all, simply to use generative AI, to use a large language model like ChatGPT, where we provided exactly this data set and also additional information in form of documentation and publication. And then said, okay, come on, create us a metadata schema and metadata description for this kind of data set. This was the outcome, which in the beginning was not really bad. So we got metadata for the data set based on the publication, which is relatively easy for an LLM. But some things were not quite good, like, for example, correct identification of the attributes. And here we said, okay, we need a better and a more fine granular way how to go through that process of enriching metadata, enriching a data set with metadata. And hence we thought about a tool which goes through that process of annotating data sets with metadata, taking also into account context data as we have seen it before. So here, this is Conda, our tool, which we created. It's called Conda, and which is based on generative AI, utilizing large language models to support different tasks on the way to a rich data set. So first step in that tool is to upload the files that we would like to have enriched, so the data set and context files. And what the researcher needs to do in the beginning is also to select the domain that we have, let's say, a vast category to search in, you can say. Here we have an example from biology. We have a plants data set, which is an example data set with plants data sets, which we want to enrich with metadata. The next step, what this tool does, is then to find and select ontologies based on the information it has. So that means we search in using terminology services. In this case, we use the TIP terminology service to find proper ontologies, and the user can then select from the ontologies which ones seem to be fitting the best. The next step, what we do then, is to analyze the data set and try to find so-called named entities. So that means we do named entity recognition. An entity could be, for example, a tomato. And then we assign it also a broader category to make search afterwards in the data set, because in the end, what we are striving at is to show the metadata in a knowledge graph, which helps us then also to search for corresponding data and metadata. Then we do the same looking at relations which we find in the data set. So for example, that a tomato grows in a greenhouse, and extract these relations. And then what we do is we utilize the ontologies to annotate then the corresponding entities and relationships we identified and assign the corresponding URI to it, so that we have an exactly the concept exactly defined. And finally, we create and offer for exploration the knowledge graph, which shows then what kind of concepts do we have in the data set, what is the metadata we have found, and then export the corresponding knowledge graph. We can also export it as RDF data. Okay, and then you can use it as any knowledge graph, explore it, query it, integrate it, and so on, and have the data in a FAIR format, as you have annotated it also with corresponding ontology terms. I just have also here the user interface, how it looks. In principle, it just repeats the steps I just named. So here you can see how we upload the data set. Here's how the people can find and find or also upload your own ontologies. This is also possible. So you see here we use the TIP terminology service. Then you can select these ontologies. And then you see here an example on what kind of entities. This is from the example we had from the production, from manufacturing. Here you see the entities identified and the broader categories, so like metal forming and so on, which helps us then in exploration and searching in the knowledge graph, and the same for the relationships. And then in the end, you see how these entities and relationships are then assigned corresponding URIs. And finally, and all of these, so these are steps where the user can also decide if this is correct or not, and also adapt and edit, delete, and add things if not correctly recognized. And then in the end, we get a knowledge graph like this, which represents the metadata that we've found. Okay, good. And this is then also how we can, where we see the ontology as RDF and where we can export it, where we see the knowledge graph as RDF and the ontology as RDF, where we can then export it. Okay, good. Basically, what this is the architect. I won't go into detail. So if you're interested, please read the paper we just published last year. So basically, what we do is that we have a user interface, as you can see, and a backend which is able to contact an LLM server to get the responses that you have just seen, and we use a Neo4j graph database where we store embeddings and where we also store the ontologies and everything, the additional context information as embeddings, and then create from that the corresponding answers and assignments that you have just seen. Okay. We also did a short qualitative evaluation. We just did a small study setup, but I will present that we are also looking into more detail in some other domains. So the first study has shown us and gave us and supported our assumption that researchers are really our tool supports researchers. So we see here usability scores, which show that even if people are not that familiar with ontologies, felt that they are supported very well by the tool in assigning metadata and enriching the data with the metadata. Okay, and also this, similarly, we have good usability values for people who are not at all or slightly familiar with knowledge graphs. Okay, so to go more into detail or to look more at specific disciplines where we try out and evaluate our tool, so that we are working, for example, in biomedicine on a project together with the Uniklinik here in Aachen, where we look at single cell data and where we annotate then the single cell data with corresponding diseases, cell types, genes, and so on, to then later on utilize the data and have more context information to then fulfill other downstream tasks like clustering, for example, differential expression, and question answering to specific relationships between genes, for example, between genes and cell types. So that means we also provide with a knowledge graph that we create a method such that we can also support question answering in that domain. Another project from a different domain is in material science, where we also utilize material characterization data and then use the experimental data created in material characterization, sorry, which we then also semantically annotate and see the different problems which we are facing in that discipline. So we are looking now in different projects, also in different problems of semantic annotation using generative AI, testing different models, testing quality differences, for example, in the input data, and testing different techniques to improve the outcome. For that, we will see a little bit later on how we can improve quality further. So another way where we think that generative AI can help in the process of research data management is, we going back now to our hospital example, is when it's about sharing data when you're not having enough data, and try to also find related data. It is very important that we get a good overview of the available data sets. And as said, that these data sets are properly described. Especially in specialized research questions. For example, here we had a project with hepatology, with specific diseases and not enough data. So to find out which data sets, what kind of data exists in different data sets, we provided a generative AI-based retrieval augmented generation approach for semantic data analysis, where we used LLMs in different ways. So one thing is that we would like the LLM to answer questions about the data sets, distributed data sets that we have. These data sets, our concept here is that these data sets are described by metadata, of course, in a unified way, but using FAIR digital objects. So each data set and the data inside of the data sets is described by the concept of FAIR digital objects. So if you don't know it, a FAIR digital object is in principle a logical unit, you could say, in the middle, as you can see it here in this shape, is in the middle you have the data, and then you have layers around it which have the metadata, which have operations, functions, describe what you can do with the data. You have access control layers around it, which say who is allowed to access the data and so on. And we used an LLMs to, first of all, create such a graph, a knowledge graph. Each node represents a data set with the corresponding data. And we describe that with a knowledge graph. And the LLM helps us to extract schema information from the data sets and to create the special format of a FAIR digital object. On the other hand, we also provide then, using an LLM, the possibility to ask questions towards the knowledge graph, such that we know where in which data set we find which data and can answer the question. What is also special about the knowledge graph is that the data sets, the relationship between the data sets, between the FAIR digital objects, is described by aspects of the data set. So, for example, a relationship could be between two objects, the range of age the patients in the data sets are covering. So that you know, if this relationship is very strong, we have between these data sets a close similarity in terms of age. Okay, so this is also one approach which we came up with. You can also, the paper is already available online, so published in the ICKG proceedings already, but you can find it online to see the exact details. Okay, now that I talked a lot about examples, what we did to improve research data management with LLMs, of course, we are also looking at how can we improve what we did so far a little bit further. So what are adjusting screws, we can say, to improve the concepts that we have? One thing, of course, very, very important in medicine, but also, of course, in other domains, is explainability and transparency. So we need to see how can we extend, how can we explain how certain results presented by an LLM, an AI application can be explained, backed up with sources that we have. And also, how has the decision been made? Then also very important, we need to see how can we improve data quality for the AI applications, and what does that do to the result of the AI applications. Because of course there are two ways to improve. One is to improve the model. The other way is to improve the data that we feed to the model. And also with this, enhance trustability of the results of the models by increasing input data quality, training data quality. Then multimodality is very important. In many applications today are very complex. So that means, let's take medicine again. You have multiple modalities like images, texts, audio, and so on. And there are models which deal very well with different modalities, and which can then help to come to a certain conclusion based on these modalities. Then also we need to see what what can we do about fine-tuning. Of course, efficiency is one aspect. How big are the models? Where can we run the models? And what kind of results do we get if we use a multi-purpose or fine-tuned model? And finally, also scalability, locality. I already said where to run them, and how can we scale them, and also looking at open versus closed source models, which ones to use, what is the quality of the results depending on the model, and also of course including context and knowledge for reasoning. If we look at the quality of training data, one thing which we looked at as a preliminary result, which has not been published right now, is that we looked at different versions of the data with different data quality deficiencies, you can say. So we used the original data, we introduced faults, you could say, in the data diminishing certain dimensions like accuracy or consistency, and then taking that into account for fine-tuning of a pre-trained model, and then evaluating basically in different, you can see it here, different metrics, the outcomes of the LLM. And first, and looking at different kinds of tasks like translation, summarization, and see how these decreases in data quality influence the output of the model. And as you can see, there is an influence in this case, looking at accuracy. Sorry, I did not put it here, but accuracy in both cases. You see there's a clear relationship between it. What can we do else? Prompting techniques. So we can do prompt engineering. That means how we ask the LLM, or how we feed, or how we ask for certain answers makes a huge difference. So here you see 3 different ways how you can do it. So either that you say, okay, you should have an inner monologue on what you do and then give an answer, or that you should solve the task by planning, you could say, or of using different alternatives to come up with an answer. I recommend, there's a nice paper, it's called the Prompt Report, where you find a very systematic prompt engineering, let's say, a very systematic review of what kind of techniques exist in prompt engineering. Of course, you can then also play with, okay, I don't show any examples to the LLM. I show a few examples or just one example, and how to do that. Also, how you do that. Do you show, for example, only positive examples? It would not be good. or only negative examples for something. So there are also different ways how you can tweak this to look at to improve the outcome. Then one other thing which is very won't say a trend, but which is a hot topic also in AI research is neurosymbolic AI. So that means we look at not only let's say neural networks and utilize the power of neural networks, but also utilize symbolic. That means, for example, knowledge graphs and reasoning to come to an answer. So what does that mean? So for example, if we have a model analyzing such a picture, it can identify there seems to be an animal, so there is an animal, there's a cage, there's fur on the animal, it has some round shape. This is a round shape and it might have round ears. So if we then utilize reasoning with knowledge about animals or knowledge about hamsters, in that case, we can derive then seems to be a hamster in a wheel in a cage. So that this we can utilize. This is a very simple example, but this we can utilize to come up with better examples and with better results in the end. And finally, what we also can do, or what is now most often done to solve complex tasks, is to create agentic networks so that we have agents, like for example, image agents or omics agents or guideline agents, which then fulfill a specific task like, okay, I classify a certain image, I interpret a certain lab value, and then have these work relatively autonomously and have let's say like an overarching agent, an orchestrator, which then can retrieve results from these agents, and you have a communication in this agentic network to solve then a bigger task of, for example, coming to a diagnosis. That's just very high level description. And this can be also further improved by, of course, a RAG approach, having corresponding data, but also including ontologies and reasoning as described for the neurosymbolic approach, and also thinking about integration of, for example, data from digital twins and synthetic data, such that we utilize many data sources. So, for example, also patient-reported outcomes, which we can then use to solve a complex task. Okay, so to conclude, we've seen examples where generative AI and LLMs are very helpful to support fair research data management, for example, for annotation of data sets. But still, of course, we need some manual checks and some knowledge about ontologies. However, it supports, and we've seen in the usability, it can support the researchers and speed up the process at least very good. Next steps for us would be intensive analysis in various domains and integration of methodologies from ontology generation, which we will have a look at. We'll look at how to maintain the knowledge graph which comes out, how to update it, and how to provide it then further to others, and how to integrate symbolic knowledge and reasoning into the tools that I presented. So thank you very much. This is, of course, not work I did alone. So my research group, I think my research group, especially Suyeon Kim, who's working on that topic, and my colleague, Professor Stefan Decker, where we collaborate on several of these projects that I just presented.